She has a special talent, showing up late, getting herself into trouble and picking fights with the most powerful man in the room, like it's an Olympic sport. He has his own talent, being ridiculously charming and unbearably teasing, especially with her. Now put them together in a luxury winery, with daily meetings and forced proximity. The result? A delicious mess, and impossible to ignore. The Westbrook vineyard stretched across the rolling hills of Napa Valley, like a painting come to life. Golden sunlight spilled over endless rows of grapevines, their leaves shimmering in the late afternoon breeze. The air carried the intoxicating perfume of ripe grapes and aged oak, a scent that Julian Westbrook had known since childhood, and loved more than almost anything in this world. Almost. At 35, Julian commanded the family wine empire with the same confidence his father and grandfather had before him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass and dark eyes that seemed to read thoughts before they were spoken, he was the kind of man who made women forget their own names. He knew it too. That was part of the problem. "The Chateau Reserve is properly chilled?" he asked his vineyard manager without looking up from the guest list in his hands. "Yes, Mr. Westbrook. Everything is ready for tonight's tasting." Julian nodded, his eyes scanning the names. Mitchell Agricultural Supplies. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. That meant she would be there. Savannah Mitchell, the woman who had spent the last 13 years treating him like something unpleasant, stuck to the bottom of her designer heels. He still remembered the first time he noticed the change. She had been 16, all bright eyes and shy smiles, always trailing after him and her brother Brandon during summer visits to the vineyard. Then, suddenly, nothing. The warmth had frozen into ice. The smiles had sharpened into daggers. The girl who used to blush when he spoke to her started responding with verbal warfare that would make seasoned politicians weep. Julian had never understood why, but somewhere along the way, he had discovered that he loved it. There was something absolutely intoxicating about watching Savannah Mitchell lose her composure, the way her cheeks flushed crimson when he pushed her buttons, the fire that blazed in those expressive eyes when he said something deliberately provocative, the way her full lips pressed together before unleashing a comeback that was somehow both infuriating and impressive. He had turned irritating her into an art form. If this story is touching your heart, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. "Is something amusing, sir?" his manager asked, noticing the slow smile spreading across Julian's face. "Just anticipating an interesting evening." He tucked the guest list into his jacket pocket and walked through the stone archways of the main tasting room. Crystal glasses sparkled under elegant chandeliers. Bottles of the vineyard's finest vintages stood ready for presentation. Everything was perfect. Julian checked his reflection in one of the windows. Dark suit, no tie, top button undone. He ran a hand through his hair, mussing it just enough to look effortlessly disheveled. Savannah always seemed particularly annoyed when he looked like this. Excellent. His phone buzzed. A message from Brandon Sheffield, his best friend since childhood, and, unfortunately, Savannah's older brother. "Running late. Savannah's coming ahead. Try not to make her cry this time." Julian typed back, "I've never made her cry. Yet." He pocketed the phone with a chuckle. Brandon had spent years playing referee between them, never quite understanding why his sister and his best friend couldn't simply coexist peacefully. Julian had given up trying to explain it himself. How could he explain that trading barbs with Savannah Mitchell was the highlight of every family gathering? That he looked for her in every room before he looked for anyone else? That her hatred, inexplicable as it was, had become strangely essential to him? He couldn't. So he didn't. The first guests began arriving as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Julian slipped into his role as charming host, shaking hands, making small talk, ensuring wine glasses were never empty. He was good at this, the performance of warmth and welcome. But his attention kept drifting to the entrance. 20 minutes into the event, she still hadn't appeared. Typical. Savannah Mitchell had never been on time for anything in her life. It was one of her countless irritating habits, right up there with her inability to reach high shelves and her tendency to trip over absolutely nothing. Julian found himself smiling again, and then, finally, she walked through the door. Savannah wore a flowing dress of soft champagne silk that moved like water around her figure. Her dark hair tumbled loose over her shoulders, unusual for her. She typically pulled it back when nervous. Her eyes scanned the room with barely concealed wariness. When those eyes found his, they narrowed instantly. Julian raised his wineglass in greeting, letting his gaze travel down her form with deliberate slowness before meeting her eyes again. Game on. Savannah Mitchell had made exactly 3 catastrophic mistakes in her 29 years of life. The first was writing that letter. The second was believing it might be answered. The third was walking into the Westbrook vineyard wearing a dress with a treacherous tendency to cling to fabric. She spotted Julian immediately. Because of course she did. Her traitorous eyes always found him first in any room, no matter how desperately she tried to look elsewhere. There he stood, all 6'2" of insufferable masculine perfection, dark hair artfully mussed, that predatory smile playing at his lips as he raised his glass in greeting. His gaze traveled down her body with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Savannah's blood heated. Whether from anger or something else entirely, she refused to examine. 13 years, she reminded herself. 13 years since you humiliated yourself, and he couldn't even bother to acknowledge it. She had been 16 and foolish, convinced that the fluttering in her chest whenever Julian Westbrook was near meant something profound. He had been 22 then, her brother Brandon's best friend, visiting their family home with easy smiles and that devastating charm that made every woman within a 50-mile radius lose her mind, including her. So she had written him a letter, poured her entire naive heart onto paper, confessed feelings she barely understood herself, left it where she knew he would find it. And then, nothing. He never mentioned it, never acknowledged it. Simply continued treating her like Brandon's annoying little sister, as if her declaration of love was so insignificant it wasn't worth a response. The rejection had shattered something inside her. So Savannah had rebuilt herself, brick by defensive brick, constructing a fortress of sarcasm and feigned hatred. If Julian Westbrook thought she was beneath his notice, fine, she would make him notice her another way, by driving him absolutely insane. "You're 15 minutes late," a deep voice murmured near her ear, making her jump. Julian had materialized beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm that had no business smelling that good. "Fashionably late," she corrected, refusing to look at him. "It's a concept you wouldn't understand, given your tragic lack of fashion sense. This suit cost more than your car." "My point exactly. Money can't buy taste." His low chuckle vibrated through her. "I've missed that sharp tongue of yours, Savannah. I haven't missed anything about you." "Liar." She finally turned to face him, ready with a devastating retort, and immediately regretted it. Up close, Julian's dark eyes held an intensity that always made her stomach flip traitorously. The hint of stubble along his jaw only emphasized its sharp angles. The slight curve of his lips suggested he knew exactly what effect he had on her. "I need to use the restroom," she announced abruptly. His eyebrows rose. "By all means, don't let me keep you from whatever requires such urgent escape." Savannah didn't dignify that with a response. She simply turned and walked away, hyper-aware of his gaze following her every step. The private corridor leading to the guest restrooms was blissfully empty. She locked herself inside the elegantly appointed bathroom and gripped the marble counter, staring at her reflection. "Get it together," she commanded herself. "He's just a man. An arrogant, insufferable, unreasonably attractive man who broke your heart without even knowing he held it." She splashed cold water on her wrists, touched up her lipstick, and adjusted her dress. The silk had bunched slightly at the back. She reached behind to smooth it down, checking her phone for messages from her father's company while she walked out. Savannah moved backward through the doorway, still typing, completely unaware that her dress had caught on the delicate lace of her underwear, hiking the fabric up to expose far more than she would ever intentionally show. She heard footsteps, stopped. Then warmth, solid and masculine, appeared directly behind her. Large hands moved quickly, efficiently, releasing the trapped fabric with a swift motion that sent the silk cascading back into place. Savannah spun around. Julian stood inches away, his dark eyes blazing with something that made her breath catch. His jaw was tight. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "You were exposed," he said, his voice rough and low. "I was the only one who saw." The world stopped, then crashed back with the force of a tidal wave. Heat flooded her face, her entire body. He had seen everything. The lace underwear, the curves she normally kept carefully hidden. "Don't say anything," she hissed, shoving at his chest. "Ever. To anyone." But Julian didn't step back. Instead, that slow, sinful smile spread across his face, and his eyes dropped briefly, involuntarily, to her hips before meeting hers again. "I won't be forgetting that anytime soon." Savannah fled. She spent the rest of the evening avoiding him, which was nearly impossible given how his gaze seemed to track her through the crowd like a heat-seeking missile. Every time she glanced his way, he was watching her with an expression that made her skin tingle and her thoughts scatter. The burning in her stomach wasn't just mortification anymore. It was something far more dangerous. And from the knowing glint in Julian Westbrook's eyes, he was fully aware of it. 1 week after the incident that shall never be mentioned, Savannah sat in her father's office, certain she had misheard him. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" Richard Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to ruin his daughter's life. The Westbrook Vineyard Partnership, 8 weeks of close coordination for the International Expansion Project, daily meetings at their facility. You'll be our lead representative. Daily meetings at the Vineyard for 8 weeks. That's what I said, sweetheart. Is there a problem? Only that Julian Westbrook has seen my underwear and I'll have to look at his smug face every single day for 2 months. No problem at all, she managed through gritted teeth. I'm thrilled. Her father's eyes crinkled with amusement. You've never been a convincing liar, Savannah. I know you and the Westbrook heir have your differences, but this deal is important. The Mitchell name needs to be represented by someone I trust completely. The guilt trip worked, as it always did. Savannah loved her father, loved the company he had built from nothing. If surviving 8 weeks of Julian's presence was what the family business required, she would do it, even if it killed her, which it very well might. 3 days later, Savannah pulled her car into the Westbrook Vineyard parking area, exactly 15 minutes late. It wasn't intentional, it never was, but somehow, no matter how early she left home, time seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. Julian was waiting on the front steps of the main administrative building, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in that infuriating way of his. "You're late," he observed as she approached. "Traffic. There's no traffic between your apartment and here." "I checked." "You checked." She stopped in front of him, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. "That's not creepy at all. I prefer the term thorough." He pushed off from the stone pillar he'd been leaning against and gestured toward the door. "Shall we? Or would you like another 15 minutes to prepare whatever excuse you'll use tomorrow?" Savannah swept past him without responding, catching a whiff of that maddening cologne as she did. Her traitorous body responded immediately. Racing pulse, heated skin, thoughts that had no business existing in a professional setting. "Focus," she commanded herself. "This is business, nothing more." The conference room Julian led her to was all exposed stone and modern glass, with a long oak table surrounded by comfortable chairs. Files and documents were already arranged at one end, along with 2 glasses and a bottle of something that looked expensive. "Wine at 9 in the morning?" she asked. "It's grape juice. I know you can't handle anything stronger before noon." "I can handle plenty." That slow smile appeared. "I remember." Heat crept up her neck. Was he referencing what she thought he was referencing? The way his eyes dropped briefly to her hips suggested yes. "Can we please focus on work?" she snapped. "Of course." Julian pulled out a chair for her with exaggerated courtesy. "After you, Miss Mitchell." She sat, hyper-aware of how close he stood, how his fingers brushed her shoulder as he pushed the chair in. Then he took the seat directly beside her, not across the table where any normal person would sit, but right next to her, close enough that his knee occasionally bumped hers beneath the table. "The expansion plans," he began, sliding a folder toward her. As she reached for it, his hand covered hers, holding it in place. "These are confidential. I trust you understand the sensitivity of the information." "I'm not going to sell your secrets, Julian." "I know." His thumb traced a small circle on her wrist before releasing her. "I just wanted an excuse to touch you." Savannah yanked her hand back, her heart hammering. That's harassment. Is it? You're blushing. I don't think you hated it as much as you're pretending. I always blush when I'm angry. He didn't sound convinced. Shall we continue? The meeting lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of Julian leaning too close when explaining spreadsheets. 3 hours of his fingers finding excuses to brush against hers. 3 hours of that deep voice murmuring near her ear, making her lose track of sentences and forget questions mid-thought. By the time they finished, Savannah was wound tighter than a spring. Same time tomorrow? Julian asked as he walked her to the door. I'll be here. 15 minutes late? Probably. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from devastatingly handsome to almost boyishly appealing. Savannah's chest tightened unexpectedly. I'll have coffee waiting, he said. The good kind, not that swamp water you drink. How do you know what kind of coffee I drink? I pay attention. He reached out, and before she could react, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her temple. To everything about you. Savannah's breath caught. For a moment, standing in the doorway with afternoon light streaming around them, something shifted in the air, something dangerous and electric and terrifying. Then she stepped back, breaking the spell. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. 9:15, he corrected with a knowing smile. She didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. 2 weeks into their forced partnership, Savannah had developed several coping mechanisms. First, arrive exactly 15 minutes late because punctuality felt like surrender. Second, maintain at least 3 feet of distance from Julian at all times because closer proximity made her brain malfunction. Third, never, under any circumstances, let him see how much his presence affected her. She was failing spectacularly at all 3. You're doing it again, Julian observed during a tasting session in the barrel room. Savannah looked up from the glass of Pinot Noir she'd been pretending to analyze. Doing what? Touching your hair. He nodded toward her hand, which had indeed migrated to twist a strand around her finger. You do that when you're nervous. She dropped her hand immediately. I'm not nervous. Then why is your pulse jumping in your throat? Because you're annoying. Annoyance doesn't cause that particular physiological response. He moved closer, and Savannah instinctively stepped back, her hip hitting the edge of a wine barrel. Julian kept advancing until barely a foot separated them. Shall I tell you what does? Please don't. Attraction. The word was a low murmur. Desire. Wanting something you've convinced yourself you can't have. The only thing I want is for you to respect personal boundaries. Boring. He reached past her to grab a bottle from the shelf behind, his chest brushing her shoulder. Try this one. New vintage. Aged 18 months in French oak. Savannah accepted the glass he poured with trembling fingers. When he handed it to her, their hands touched. He held the contact a moment too long, his thumb pressing against her palm. Careful, he said softly. This one's strong. It can go to your head quickly. She pulled free. I know how to handle strong things. Do you? His eyes darkened. I'd love to test that theory. The tension between them had become a living thing, growing more volatile with each passing day. Julian had abandoned all pretense of professional distance. He touched her constantly, a hand at the small of her back guiding her through doorways, fingers adjusting documents beside hers, his body appearing behind her whenever she reached for something on a high shelf. That last habit was particularly maddening. I can use a step stool, she grumbled after he pressed against her back to retrieve a file from an upper cabinet. Where's the fun in that? His breath was warm against her ear. Besides, I like being useful. You like being insufferable. That too. He placed the file in her hands, his fingers wrapping around hers momentarily. But admit it. You'd miss me if I stopped. She wouldn't admit any such thing, especially since it might be true. That evening, a dinner meeting with potential international partners pushed their dynamic into new territory. The restaurant was upscale and intimate, filled with soft lighting and softer music. Savannah had chosen a simple black dress that she hoped projected professional competence and absolutely nothing else. Julian's eyes, when he saw her, suggested the dress was projecting something else entirely. You look... He paused, seeming to search for words. Professional. Thank you. I was going to say devastating, but I didn't want to give you ammunition. Too late. She smiled sweetly. I'm keeping devastating for future use. The partners arrived, 3 executives from a European distribution company, including one named Marcus, who was tall, blonde, and extremely attentive to Savannah. He held her chair, complimented her insight during business discussions, laughed at her jokes with perhaps more enthusiasm than they warranted. Julian watched it all with increasingly dark eyes. The Mitchell representative is quite impressive, Marcus commented during dessert, directing the statement at Julian while his gaze remained on Savannah. Beautiful and brilliant. A rare combination. She's adequate, Julian replied flatly. Savannah shot him a glare. Adequate. Marcus smiled undeterred. I'd love to discuss further partnership opportunities, perhaps over dinner tomorrow night. Just the 2 of us. Before Savannah could respond, Julian's hand landed on her knee beneath the table. Heavy, possessive, his fingers pressed firmly against her skin. She has a commitment tomorrow, he said smoothly. Contract review, with me, all evening. I don't recall, Savannah started. Urgent matter, just came up. Julian's grip tightened. Very sorry. Marcus glanced between them, comprehension dawning in his eyes. He retreated gracefully, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But Julian's hand remained on her knee for the rest of the meal, his thumb drawing slow circles that made coherent thought nearly impossible. Later, in the parking lot, Savannah rounded on him. What was that? What was what? You know exactly what. You told him I was busy tomorrow. I'm not busy tomorrow. You are now. Julian stepped closer, backing her against her car. Contract review. My office. 7 o'clock. There are no contracts that need reviewing. Then we'll find something else to review. His hand came up to cup her jaw, tilting her face toward his. You're not having dinner with him, Savannah. You don't get to decide that. No. His thumb traced her lower lip. But I'm asking you not to. Don't go. The vulnerability beneath the command startled her. For a moment, the arrogant mask slipped, and she glimpsed something raw in his expression. Why do you care? She whispered. I don't know. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. But I do. More than I should. Savannah's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. They stood there, breath mingling, the space between them charged with possibility. Then a car honked nearby, shattering the moment. Julian stepped back, the mask sliding into place. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I'm always late. I know. That smile returned. I'll wait. He walked away, leaving Savannah trembling against her car, wondering when exactly this game had stopped feeling like a game. Savannah had convinced herself that canceling dinner with Marcus was a purely strategic decision, professional courtesy. Nothing to do with the way Julian's thumb had traced her lip in the parking lot, or the raw emotion she'd glimpsed behind his usual arrogance. Nothing at all. She was still clinging to this delusion 4 days later, when the Vineyard hosted its monthly client appreciation event. The main tasting room sparkled with crystal and candlelight, filled with wealthy patrons who bought wine by the case and considered the Westbrook label a status symbol. Savannah wore a fitted emerald dress, definitely not chosen because Julian had once mentioned that green was his favorite color. She was representing Mitchell Agricultural, maintaining professional appearances. That was all. Julian found her the moment she walked in. His gaze swept over her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Green, he observed. Interesting choice. I like green. So do I. His voice dropped. Very much. Before she could respond, a feminine laugh cut through the ambient noise. Savannah turned to see a stunning woman approaching Julian with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how beautiful she was. Tall, blonde, with cheekbones that could cut glass, and a dress that left little to imagination. Julian, darling. The woman kissed both his cheeks, letting her lips linger near the corner of his mouth. It's been too long. Victoria. Julian's smile was polite but not warm. I didn't know you were in California. Surprise visit. I couldn't miss the chance to see my favorite vintner. Victoria's hand settled on his arm with practiced familiarity. Remember that weekend in Bordeaux? The private tasting you arranged? Savannah's stomach clenched. She suddenly found the wine display across the room fascinating. That was years ago, Julian said. The best things are worth remembering. Victoria stepped closer, her fingers trailing up his arm. I'm staying at the Grand Oak Hotel. The presidential suite has a lovely balcony, perfect for sharing a bottle of something special. The invitation was unmistakable. Savannah's hand tightened around her wine glass hard enough that the stem creaked in protest. You have no right to be jealous, she told herself firmly. He's not yours. He's never been yours. He's just a man who enjoys tormenting you. But watching Victoria lean into Julian, her red lips inches from his ear as she whispered something that made him raise an eyebrow, it ignited something primal and irrational in Savannah's chest. Before she could think better of it, she crossed the room. Darling? She slid her arm through Julian's, pressing close to his side. Your brother called. Family emergency. We need to leave immediately. Julian's surprise lasted only a heartbeat before something wicked and delighted sparked in his eyes. Is that so? Very urgent. Savannah smiled at Victoria with sugary sweetness. So sorry to interrupt. I'm sure you understand. Family comes first. Victoria's perfect eyebrows rose. She looked at Savannah, then at Julian, then at the possessive way Savannah was gripping his arm. Understanding dawned, followed by a graceful retreat. Of course. Julian, call me when you're free. She glided away, throwing one last lingering glance over her shoulder. The moment she was gone, Julian turned to Savannah with a grin that could only be described as triumphant. Family emergency? Shut up. Brandon doesn't even have my number memorized. He texts. I said shut up. You were jealous. He sounded absolutely delighted. Magnificently, gloriously jealous. I was saving you from an awkward situation. You were staking a claim. He pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her waist. I loved every second of it. Say darling again. Absolutely not. Please. His lips brushed her temple. It sounded so good coming from that sharp tongue of yours. Savannah tried to pull away, but Julian held firm, guiding her toward a private alcove partially hidden by wine displays. The shadows enveloped them, muffling the chatter of the main room. Let me go, she demanded. Not yet. He pressed her back against the cool stone wall, his body caging hers. First, admit it. Admit what? That you care. That seeing her touch me made you feel something. It made me feel nauseous. Liar. He caught her wrists, pinning them gently beside her head. Your pulse is racing. Your pupils are dilated. And you keep looking at my mouth. She hadn't realized she was doing that. She forced her gaze up to his eyes, which was somehow worse. They burned with an intensity that stole her breath. Julian. Say it, Savannah. His forehead touched hers. Just once. Tell me you feel this too. The air between them crackled. Savannah could feel the warmth of him everywhere, even though only his hands touched her wrists. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her resistance crumbled like sand. I feel it, she whispered. I've always felt it. That's the problem. Something triumphant and tender crossed his face. He released one of her wrists to cup her jaw, tilting her face up. His thumb traced her cheekbone. His gaze dropped to her lips. Savannah, he breathed. He leaned in. She rose to meet him. The space between them narrowed to millimeters. There you are. They sprang apart as Brandon Sheffield rounded the wine display, completely oblivious to what he'd interrupted. Julian's best friend and Savannah's brother looked between them with cheerful ignorance. I've been looking everywhere. Dad wants to discuss the shipping contract, Sav. And Julian, your vineyard manager needs approval on something. Brandon frowned. Why do you both look like you've seen a ghost? No reason, Savannah managed, her voice strangled. Just discussing wine. Julian's jaw was tight, frustration radiating from every line of his body. Brandon shrugged, already turning away. Well, come on then. Business waits for no one. He strode off. Savannah moved to follow, but Julian caught her hand. This isn't over, he said quietly. She looked back at him, at his dark eyes still blazing with interrupted want, his chest rising and falling rapidly. I know, she replied, and despite everything, the admission didn't terrify her as much as it should have. 3 days after the almost kiss, Savannah had perfected the art of professional distance. She arrived at meetings precisely 15 minutes late, her signature timing, spoke only about business matters, and maintained a careful 3-foot buffer between herself and Julian at all times. Julian, for his part, seemed determined to make this impossible. You're avoiding me, he observed during a vineyard tour meant to showcase new irrigation equipment. I'm standing right next to you. Physically present, emotionally absent. He steered her around a muddy patch with a hand at her elbow. You haven't insulted me once today. It's unsettling. Would you prefer I called you an arrogant, presumptuous wine snob? There she is. His smile was warm, relieved. I was worried you'd been replaced by a polite imposter. Despite herself, Savannah laughed. The sound surprised them both. They walked between rows of grapevines, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the earth. Julian explained the technical aspects of the new irrigation system, but Savannah found herself watching him instead of the equipment. The way his eyes lit up when discussing the vineyard, the pride in his voice when mentioning his grandfather's legacy, the gentle way he touched the grape leaves as if greeting old friends. You really love this place, she said, interrupting his explanation of water conservation metrics. Julian paused, looking around at the rolling hills gilded by sunlight. It's in my blood. 4 generations of Westbrooks have worked this land. Sometimes I think the vines know me better than most people do. That's either poetic or deeply concerning. Probably both. He turned to her, his expression softening. What about you? Do you love the family business? Savannah considered the question. I love what it represents. My father built something from nothing. Watching him taught me that hard work and integrity matter. She shrugged. The actual equipment specifications are less inspiring. You could do something else. I could. But family is family. She met his gaze. You understand that. More than you know. Something shifted between them. The antagonistic edge dulling into something gentler, more honest. Savannah found herself wanting to know more about this version of Julian, the man beneath the charm and sarcasm. A rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. They both looked up as dark clouds rolled across the previously clear sky with alarming speed. The California weather had turned treacherous without warning, as it sometimes did in wine country. We should head back, Julian said, already taking her hand. They'd made it halfway to the main building when the sky opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them instantly. Savannah yelped as cold water plastered her blouse to her skin and turned the ground beneath her feet into a slippery mess. She stumbled, her heel catching on a vine root. Julian's arm wrapped around her waist before she could fall, pulling her firmly against his chest. They stood there, rain streaming down their faces, bodies pressed together, his arm a band of warmth around her middle. I've got you, he murmured against her ear. Savannah gripped his shoulders for balance, acutely aware of how thin their wet clothes had become. She could feel the hard planes of his chest, the strength in the arms holding her steady. Water droplets clung to his eyelashes. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. He had never looked more beautiful. We should find shelter, she managed. There's a tool shed 20 yards that way. But he didn't move. His fingers pressed into her waist, holding her close. Are you hurt? Just my dignity. That's been on life support for years. Rude. But she was smiling, and so was he, and the rain kept falling around them like a curtain separating them from the rest of the world. Julian's free hand came up to brush wet hair from her face. His touch was impossibly gentle as he traced the curve of her cheek. He dragged his knuckles slowly down the line of her jaw, pausing at her chin. His thumb swept across her lower lip, reverent and deliberate. Why did you hate me for so long? He asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. What did I do? The question pierced through Savannah's defenses, striking at the wound she'd carried for 13 years. She wanted to deflect, to retreat behind sarcasm and sharp words. But something about this moment, the rain, his gentleness, the genuine confusion in his eyes, demanded honesty. I didn't hate you, she whispered. I never hated you. Then what? She couldn't tell him. Not yet. The truth was too painful, too humiliating, but she could give him something. I was hurt, she admitted, by something that happened a long time ago, something I thought you did. Julian's brow furrowed. What did you think I did? It doesn't matter now. She pulled back slightly, though his arm kept her close. We should get inside. We'll catch pneumonia. Savannah, please. Her voice cracked. Not yet. He studied her face for a long moment, clearly wanting to push further. But whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. Okay. Not yet. He released her waist but kept hold of her hand. But eventually, you're going to tell me. And whatever it was, whatever you thought I did, I'm going to fix it." She didn't have a response for that, so she simply let him lead her through the rain to the small tool shed, where they huddled together among rakes and pruning shears while the storm raged outside. Julian found an old canvas dropcloth and wrapped it around her shoulders. He rubbed her arms to generate warmth, then pulled her back against his chest without asking permission. She let him, too cold and too confused to protest. "For the record," he said quietly, his chin resting on top of her head, "I've never wanted to hurt you. Irritate you, yes. Drive you crazy, absolutely. But hurt you." His arms tightened. "Never." Savannah closed her eyes, letting his warmth seep into her bones. "I believe you," she said. And for the first time in 13 years she actually did. The Mitchell family home sat on a hillside overlooking the valley, a sprawling estate that spoke of old money and older traditions. Savannah had grown up within these walls, running through hallways, hiding in closets during games with Brandon, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly bright. It was also the place where, at 16, she had written a letter that would alter the course of her life. Tonight, her parents were hosting a dinner to celebrate the successful midpoint of the Mitchell-Westbrook partnership. 6 weeks of daily collaboration had yielded impressive results: distribution agreements, marketing strategies, and a projected increase in international sales that made both families very happy. Savannah stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of her burgundy wrap dress. The color complemented her dark hair and brought warmth to her complexion. She had chosen it carefully, telling herself it had nothing to do with Julian's preference for rich, deep colors. She was a terrible liar, even to herself. The past weeks had transformed something fundamental between them. Since that rainy afternoon in the tool shed, Julian had been different, softer, more patient. He still teased her, still invaded her personal space, still made her pulse race with his proximity. But there was a tenderness beneath the provocations now, as if he was waiting for her to trust him with something important. The secret of the letter burned in her chest. She had almost told him a dozen times, during quiet moments in the conference room, while walking through the vineyards at sunset, when he reached past her to grab documents and let his hand linger on her waist just a moment too long, but the words always stuck in her throat, blocked by 13 years of hurt and humiliation. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Sav, guests are arriving." Brandon's voice carried through the wood. "Julian's already here, looking like he owns the place, which technically he doesn't, yet. I'll be down in a minute." She heard her brother's footsteps retreat and took one last look in the mirror. Tonight would be fine. A pleasant dinner with family and business partners. No drama, no revelations, no complications. Famous last thoughts. The dining room glowed with candlelight when Savannah descended the grand staircase. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across the walls. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. Her mother had outdone herself as usual. Julian stood near the fireplace, engaged in conversation with her father. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. When he turned at the sound of her heels on marble, something flickered in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. "You're only 5 minutes late," he said as she approached. "I'm impressed. I'm capable of punctuality when properly motivated." "What motivated you tonight?" The honest answer, that she had been too nervous to dawdle, was not something she planned to share. "The roast. My mother makes excellent roast." Julian's lips quirked. "Of course. The roast." Dinner proceeded smoothly at first. Richard Mitchell held court at the head of the table, regaling the group with stories of the company's early days. Elizabeth Mitchell, ever the gracious hostess, ensured wine glasses remained full and conversation flowed freely. Brandon, seated across from Julian, matched his friend drink for drink, while contributing increasingly loud commentary. Savannah picked at her food, hyper-aware of Julian beside her. His thigh pressed against hers beneath the table, accidentally at first, then deliberately when she didn't move away. His hand found her knee during the second course, fingers tracing idle patterns that made it impossible to focus on her mother's questions about the partnership's progress. "The international expansion is exceeding projections," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "Julian's contacts in Europe have been invaluable." Working together has been illuminating. Julian's thumb drew a circle on her inner knee. Savannah has hidden depths. She's always been stubborn, Brandon interjected, reaching for the wine bottle again. Remember when she was 16 and refused to speak to anyone for a week? We thought she'd gone mute. Savannah's stomach dropped. She remembered that week vividly. It was right after she'd delivered the letter. Right after Julian had failed to respond. I don't recall that, Julian said, frowning slightly. Oh, it was dramatic. Brandon refilled his glass, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling through the air. She locked herself in her room, wouldn't come out for meals. Mom thought she was sick. Dad threatened to break down the door. Brandon! Savannah's voice carried a warning he didn't heed. What triggered it? Julian asked, his attention sharpening. Who knows? Teenage hormones, probably. Brandon laughed, taking a long drink. Or maybe it was that ridiculous letter she wrote. You know, the one she... Brandon! Savannah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Can I speak with you in the kitchen, now? But her brother, emboldened by wine and years of suppressed guilt, kept talking. The one she wrote to you, Julian. The love letter, remember? The silence that followed was absolute. Julian had gone very still. What letter? Brandon blinked, seeming to finally register the horror on his sister's face. The color drained from his cheeks as realization struck. He looked at Savannah, then at Julian, then back at Savannah. Oh, he said quietly. Oh no. What letter? Julian repeated, his voice low and dangerous. I thought you knew. Brandon set down his wineglass with trembling hands. I thought maybe you'd read it and just decided not to say anything, to spare her feelings. Brandon? Julian's jaw was tight. What letter? Savannah couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in as the secret she'd guarded for over a decade came spilling out in the worst possible way. When Savannah was 16, Brandon said slowly, the words dragging from him like confessions under torture. She wrote you a letter, a love letter. She left it in your jacket pocket when you visited for the weekend. I never received any letter. I know. Brandon dropped his gaze to the table. Because I took it. I found it before you did, and I intercepted it. I read it, and I took it, and I never gave it to you. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Savannah's mother had pressed a hand to her mouth. Her father was watching Julian with wary concern. And Julian looked as if someone had just told him the sky was actually green, and he'd been colorblind his entire life. You took it, he said flatly. A letter she wrote to me. You took it. I was trying to protect her. Brandon's voice cracked with desperation. She was 16, Julian. 16. And you were 22. And you were my best friend. And I knew you didn't see her that way. Not then. I thought if you read it, you'd laugh, or worse, you'd be kind about it. And either way, she'd be humiliated. I was trying to save her from embarrassment. By making her think I ignored her. Julian's voice rose. By letting her believe I received her feelings and simply didn't care enough to respond. I didn't think she'd take it so hard. I thought she'd forget about it in a week. 13 years. The words came from Savannah barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood frozen beside her chair, tears streaming down her face, despite her best efforts to contain them. 13 years, Brandon. I spent 13 years thinking he read what I wrote and decided I wasn't worth a response. That I was so insignificant he couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge my feelings. Sav. I was 16 years old and I wrote him everything. Her voice broke. I told him I loved him. I told him he was the most wonderful person I'd ever met. I told him I dreamed about him every night and thought about him every day. And when he never said anything, when he just kept treating me like Brandon's annoying little sister, I thought it was because I meant nothing to him, less than nothing. She turned to Julian, whose face had gone pale beneath his tan. That's why I hated you, she choked out, because it was easier than admitting I was still in love with someone who thought I was a joke. Then she fled. She heard her mother call her name, heard the scrape of Julian's chair, heard Brandon's anguished apology following her through the halls, but she didn't stop. She ran through the kitchen, out the back door, across the moonlit garden, and into the vineyard that bordered her family's property. The vines stretched before her like sentinels, witnesses to all the dreams she'd buried here as a girl. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled and she couldn't run anymore. Then she collapsed against an old oak tree at the edge of the property, wrapping her arms around herself as sobs racked her body. 13 years of pain, 13 years of pretending, all because her brother had decided to play protector without understanding the damage he would cause. And now Julian knew. Now he knew everything. Her feelings, her heartbreak, her pathetic teenage devotion that had apparently never quite faded, despite her best efforts. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth and never face any of them again. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans, because footsteps were approaching through the vineyard, and she knew, without looking, exactly who they belonged to. Julian had never moved so fast in his life. The moment Savannah fled the dining room, he was on his feet. Brandon tried to grab his arm, stammering apologies and explanations, but Julian shrugged him off without a word. He didn't trust himself to speak. The rage simmering beneath his skin was too hot, too volatile. If he opened his mouth, he might say something that would end a 20-year friendship. Right now, the only thing that mattered was Savannah. He caught a glimpse of Burgundy disappearing through the kitchen and followed, ignoring Elizabeth Mitchell's startled exclamation. The back door stood open, swaying gently in the evening breeze. Beyond it, the garden stretched toward the vineyard, silver-lit by a nearly full moon. Julian ran. He followed the sounds of her footsteps, the rustle of disturbed vines, the soft echo of her sobs carried on the wind. His heart hammered against his ribs with each stride. 13 years. 13 years of confusion, of wondering what he'd done to earn her hostility, of watching her build walls higher and higher while he stood on the other side, desperate to understand. And all along, the answer had been a letter he'd never received. A declaration of love intercepted by the one person both of them trusted completely. He found her beneath an ancient oak tree, curled against its trunk with her arms wrapped around her knees. The moonlight caught the tear tracks on her cheeks, turning them to silver ribbons. She looked young and fragile and utterly shattered. Something in Julian's chest cracked wide open. "Go away," she said without looking up. Her voice was raw, scraped hollow by crying. "Please. I can't do this right now. I'm not going anywhere." Julian, 13 years. He approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. "You've spent 13 years hating me for something I never did. I think I've earned the right to stay." She finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara smudged, hair escaping from its careful arrangement. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "I didn't hate you," she whispered. "I told you that. You told me a lot of things tonight." Julian stopped a few feet away, close enough to touch if he reached out. He kept his hands at his sides. "But I need to hear them again, from you, without your brother's drunken confession setting the stage." Savannah let out a laugh that was more sob than humor. "What's left to say? You know everything now. At 16, I made a fool of myself writing a love letter to my brother's best friend. He was protecting me from the rejection he assumed was coming. Was he right to assume that?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Savannah stared at him, confusion flickering across her features. "What?" Julian crouched down until they were eye level. This close, he could see the rapid pulse at her throat, the way her breath came in shallow gasps. He could smell her perfume, something soft and floral that he'd been quietly addicted to for weeks. "Brandon intercepted that letter because he thought I would reject you," Julian said carefully. "Was he right? If I had read what you wrote at 16, would I have laughed it off, ignored it, treated your feelings as a childish crush to be dismissed? I don't know, would you? I don't know either." He reached out finally, brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek. "But I know what I would have done differently if I'd known why you started hating me. I would have fought harder to understand. I would have pushed past those walls you built instead of just throwing myself against them. I would have made you tell me the truth. The truth is humiliating. The truth is that you loved me." His voice dropped, rough with emotion. "There's nothing humiliating about that." Savannah's lower lip trembled. "You don't understand. I was a teenager with a crush, a stupid, obvious, pathetic crush that everyone could see except apparently you. When you didn't respond to the letter, I thought you were being kind by pretending it never happened, sparing me the embarrassment of an outright rejection. But the kindness felt worse than cruelty, because at least cruelty would have been acknowledgement. At least you would have seen me. I always saw you. Julian shifted closer, his hand moving to cup her jaw. Even when you were 16 and off limits, and my best friend's little sister. I saw you. Those bright eyes that followed me everywhere. That smile that could light up a room. The way you laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. They were never funny. They were occasionally funny. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I noticed when you stopped smiling at me. When the warmth became ice, I spent months trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Eventually, I convinced myself you'd simply grown up and realized I wasn't worth your admiration. That's the opposite of what happened. I know that now. He leaned in, his forehead nearly touching hers. I know that a 16-year-old girl was brave enough to write down her feelings and offer them to me. And because of circumstances beyond either of our control, I never got to receive that gift. And I know that instead of healing from the perceived rejection, you carried that wound for 13 years, letting it fester, using it as armor. Tears spilled fresh down her cheeks. It was easier to pretend I hated you. Was it? No. The word came out broken. It was torture. Every time I saw you, every time you smiled at someone else, every time you brought a date to a family event, it was like being stabbed all over again. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let go of the anger because if I did, there would only be pain underneath. Julian's other hand came up to frame her face, tilting it toward his. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Savannah Mitchell, because I'm only going to say this once, and I need you to believe it. She held perfectly still, barely breathing. If I had received that letter when you were 16, he said slowly, deliberately, I would have kept it. I would have folded it carefully and put it somewhere safe and looked at it when no one was watching. Because even then, even when you were too young and I was too stupid to admit my own feelings, I knew you were special. I knew you were the kind of person who comes along once in a lifetime. Julian, but you were 16 and I was 22, and you were my best friend's sister. So I would have waited. I would have kept that letter as a promise and waited until the timing was right, until you were old enough, until the circumstances made sense. His voice roughened. And then I would have come for you, because some things are worth waiting for. A sob escaped her. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. But all those years, all the women, the flirting, the distractions. The word was harsh with self-recrimination. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that came close to the way I feel when you walk into a room and pretend you don't see me. When you sharpen your tongue against me like I'm the only target worth hitting. When your cheeks flush with anger and your eyes blaze with fire and you make me work for every single smile. Savannah was trembling now, her hands coming up to grip his wrists where he held her face. I never stopped loving you, she confessed, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. I pretended. I convinced myself. But every time you touched me, every time you got too close, every time you looked at me the way you're looking at me now, I knew I was still completely, hopelessly, stupidly in love with you. Julian's breath caught. 13 years of questions. 13 years of confusion. 13 years of wanting something he hadn't let himself name. And here it was, offered to him beneath a moonlit sky, wrapped in tears and trembling honesty. Say it again, he demanded softly. I love you. Her voice was stronger now, defiant almost, as if daring him to reject her a second time. I've loved you since I was 16 years old, and I never stopped, no matter how hard I tried. There. Now you know everything. Now you can... He didn't let her finish. He couldn't wait another second. His mouth found hers with 13 years of desperate hunger behind it. The first touch of Julian's lips against hers was like lightning striking parched earth. Savannah gasped into his mouth, her fingers clutching his wrists as sensation overwhelmed her. This wasn't the gentle, tentative kiss she might have imagined during those lonely teenage years. This was hunger, desperation, 13 years of suppressed longing, igniting into something fierce and consuming. Julian kissed her like a man who had been starving without knowing it. His hands slid from her face into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the contact. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, and when she opened for him, the sound he made, low and rough and satisfied, vibrated through her entire body. She stopped thinking. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. He shifted, one knee pressing into the grass beside her as he gathered her against his chest. The bark of the oak tree scraped her back through the thin fabric of her dress, but she didn't care. Nothing existed except the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, the drumbeat of his heart against her palm. Savannah. He breathed against her lips, the name a prayer and a promise. God, Savannah. She answered by pulling him back to her. The kiss evolved, shifting from desperate to deliberate. Julian explored her mouth with devastating thoroughness, learning the taste of her, the texture, the small sounds she made when he did something particularly right. His teeth grazed her lower lip. His tongue soothed the sting. She whimpered, and he swallowed the sound greedily. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Savannah felt as if she'd been remade. The girl who had written that letter at 16, the woman who had armored herself in sarcasm and feigned hatred, they seemed like strangers now. In their place was someone new, someone brave enough to love openly. Julian pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. I've wanted to do that since you walked into my vineyard 6 weeks ago wearing that ridiculous champagne dress. It wasn't ridiculous. It was perfect. You were perfect. And I spent the entire evening imagining what it would be like to kiss that sharp mouth of yours. His thumb traced her swollen lips. Reality far exceeds imagination. Savannah laughed, the sound watery with residual tears but genuine. You're not as terrible at kissing as I expected. High praise from the woman who's been insulting me for over a decade. Someone had to keep your ego in check. And you've done an admirable job. He pulled back slightly, studying her face in the moonlight. His expression softened into something that made her chest ache. I meant what I said. If I'd known, if I'd received that letter, everything would have been different. We can't change the past. No, but we can stop wasting the future. His hands framed her face again, gentle now, reverent. I don't want to play games anymore, Savannah. I don't want to pretend that irritating you is enough when what I really want is this. You, us. Her heart stuttered. Julian, I'm not asking for promises tonight. I know this is overwhelming. I know you've spent years protecting yourself from exactly this moment. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is between us, it's not casual, it's not temporary. It's not something I'm going to get bored of and walk away from. How can you be sure? Because I've had 13 years to get bored of thinking about you. His smile was crooked, self-deprecating. It hasn't worked yet. Savannah's defenses, already crumbling, collapsed entirely. She surged forward, capturing his mouth in a kiss that held everything she couldn't put into words. Gratitude, relief, joy. The overwhelming, terrifying, exhilarating reality of being seen and wanted by the one person she'd never stopped loving. Julian responded instantly, gathering her closer until she was practically in his lap. His hands roamed her back, her waist, the curve of her hip. Never pushing, never demanding, but making it abundantly clear that he wanted more, so much more. Come home with me, he murmured against her throat. Not for... we don't have to... I just don't want to let you go yet. The vulnerability in his voice undid her completely. Julian Westbrook, confident and commanding, stumbling over his words like a nervous teenager. Yes, she whispered. He pulled back, searching her eyes. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He stood, pulling her with him, and kept her hand firmly clasped in his as they made their way back through the vineyard. They didn't return to the dinner party. Instead, Julian sent a quick text, presumably to her parents apologizing for the abrupt departure, before leading her to his car. The drive to his house was quiet, charged with anticipation. His thumb stroked circles on her palm, where their hands remained joined across the center console. Julian's home was exactly what she would have expected. Elegant stone and timber, nestled among the vineyard's oldest vines. Large windows reflected the moonlight. A wraparound porch invited lingering. It felt established and welcoming, like it had grown organically from the land itself. It's beautiful, she said, as he opened the front door. It's home. He guided her inside, flicking on lights that cast warm golden pools across hardwood floors and comfortable furniture. My grandfather built it, my father expanded it, I've been slowly making it mine. What have you changed? The kitchen, mostly. And I added a library. He paused, something uncertain flickering in his expression. Would you like to see it? Savannah understood what he was really asking. He was giving her an out, a chance to slow down, to retreat to safer ground. They could spend the evening looking at books and talking and keeping careful distance. She didn't want careful distance. Maybe later, she said softly. She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest, where his heart beat rapid and strong. Right now I'd rather you showed me something else. Julian's breath caught. His eyes darkened. Savannah. Her name was a warning and a plea. If we do this, I won't be able to pretend it didn't happen. I won't be able to go back to trading insults and keeping you at arm's length. Good. She rose on her toes, brushing her lips against his jaw. I'm done pretending. That was all he needed to hear. Julian kissed her like she was something precious and breakable, even as his hands trembled with barely contained desire. He led her through the house slowly, pausing to press her against walls, to explore the curve of her neck with his lips, to whisper words that made her knees weak. By the time they reached his bedroom, a large space with exposed beams and a massive bed facing windows that overlooked the vineyard, Savannah was already undone. We can stop, he said against her collarbone, his breath warm on her skin. Any time. Just say the word. The only word I want to say is more. He groaned, low and desperate, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. She wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her to the bed, laying her down with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hunger in his eyes. You're so beautiful. He hovered over her, one hand braced beside her head, the other tracing the neckline of her dress. I've imagined this more times than I should probably admit. How many times? Enough that I should be embarrassed. His fingers found the tie of her wrap dress, tugging slowly. But I'm not. I regret nothing except that it took us so long to get here. The dress fell open, revealing skin gilded by lamplight. Julian's breath caught audibly. He stared at her like a man beholding a masterpiece, his expression equal parts awe and adoration. Julian. Self-consciousness crept in, making her want to cover herself. Don't. He caught her hands before they could move. Don't hide from me. Not now. Not ever. He lowered his head, pressing a kiss to the hollow of her throat. Let me worship you the way I've been wanting to for longer than I knew. And he did. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his lips following the path of each revealed inch of skin. He murmured against her body, telling her she was perfect, that he'd dreamed of this, that every sharp word she'd ever thrown at him was worth it for this moment. His touch was tender but assured, learning the landscape of her with the dedication of a man mapping undiscovered country. When she finally lay bare beneath him, Savannah expected to feel vulnerable, exposed. Instead, she felt cherished. The way Julian looked at her, with naked devotion and barely restrained need, erased every insecurity she'd ever harbored. My turn, she whispered, reaching for his shirt buttons. He helped her, shrugging out of the fabric to reveal shoulders she'd been secretly admiring for years. Her hands explored the planes of his chest, the ridges of his abdomen, the trail of dark hair that disappeared beneath his waistband. When her fingers found his belt, he caught her wrists. Slow, he said, his voice strained. If you touch me right now, this will be over embarrassingly fast. That confident in your self-control? Around you? I have none. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until she forgot what she'd been reaching for. I've waited 13 years for this. I want it to last. And it did. Julian took his time, drawing pleasure from her with fingers and lips and whispered promises. He learned what made her gasp, what made her moan, what made her arch against him in wordless supplication. When she finally begged him, actually begged, pride completely abandoned, he joined them together with a groan that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. The sensation overwhelmed her. Tears pricked her eyes not from pain, but from the sheer emotional weight of the moment. This was Julian, who she'd loved in secret for so long. Julian, who she'd convinced herself she hated. Julian, who was looking at her now like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. Stay with me, he breathed, brushing the moisture from her cheeks. Right here. Just feel this. She did. They moved together in a rhythm that felt instinctive, inevitable. The pleasure built slowly, wave upon wave, until Savannah shattered in his arms with his name on her lips. Julian followed moments later, burying his face in her neck as his body trembled with release. Afterward, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and satisfaction. Julian's hand traced lazy patterns on her back, while her head rested on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. "I should have known," he said quietly. "Known what?" "That it would be like this with you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "That nothing else would ever compare." "You can't know that after one night." "I know it after 13 years. He shifted, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "I know it because every woman I've dated, every relationship I've attempted has failed for the same reason. None of them were you." Savannah's heart clenched. "Julian, I'm not asking you to say it back. I'm not asking for promises or commitments." His thumb stroked her cheek. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't casual for me. This isn't a fling or a conquest or an itch I needed to scratch. This is everything." "It's everything for me too," she admitted. "It's terrifying." "I know." He kissed her forehead. "We'll be terrified together." She laughed, the sound muffled against his chest. "That's oddly comforting." "I'm an oddly comforting person." "You're an oddly insufferable person." "Also true." He grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "But you love me anyway." "Unfortunately, tragically, catastrophically." He laughed and rolled her beneath him, kissing her until neither of them could breathe. When dawn finally crept through the windows, painting the room in shades of rose and gold, they were still tangled together, reluctant to let the night end. "You're going to marry me," Julian murmured against her temple, half asleep. Savannah's eyes flew open. "Is that a proposal or a prediction?" "A promise." He pulled her closer, his arms tightening possessively. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually you're going to be my wife. I'm going to spend the rest of my life irritating you. Lucky me. Lucky both of us." He kissed her one more time, soft and sweet. "Now go to sleep. We have the rest of forever to figure out the details." And wrapped in his arms, with morning light warming her skin and his heart beating steady beneath her ear, Savannah finally believed him. The weeks following that transformative night should have been perfect. In many ways, they were. Julian and Savannah fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been waiting their entire lives to find each other. Morning coffee on his porch overlooking the vineyard, stolen kisses between meetings, evenings tangled together, talking about everything and nothing, learning the small details that turn attraction into intimacy. Julian discovered that Savannah talked in her sleep, mostly nonsense, occasionally his name murmured with a softness that made his chest ache. Savannah learned that Julian was ticklish behind his knees, a weakness he guarded fiercely, and she exploited mercilessly. They laughed more than either had laughed in years. But beneath the happiness, a shadow was growing. Savannah noticed it first in the silences, the way Julian's phone would buzz with a message from Brandon, and he would glance at the screen before setting it aside without responding. The careful way he avoided mentioning his best friend's name. The tension that crept into his shoulders whenever family gatherings were discussed. Brandon had apologized profusely, to both of them, separately and together. He had explained his reasoning, acknowledged his mistake, begged forgiveness with the desperation of a man watching his two favorite people in the world slip away because of his misguided protection. Julian had accepted the apology with measured grace, but something had shifted between the two men, a distance that hadn't existed before. Her coolness where there had always been warmth, and Savannah couldn't shake the feeling that it was her fault. "You're doing it again," Julian observed one evening as they sat on his couch, a movie playing unwatched in the background. "Doing what?" "Retreating." He caught her chin, turning her face toward him. "You've been pulling away for days. Talk to me." Savannah considered deflecting, making a joke, wielding sarcasm like the shield it had always been, but they were past that now. At least she wanted them to be. "Have you talked to Brandon?" she asked quietly. Julian's expression flickered. "We've exchanged messages." "That's not what I asked." A long pause. "No, we haven't really talked. Because of me. Because of what he did. What he did to protect me." Savannah sat up, pulling away from his warmth despite every instinct screaming to stay close. "Julian, he's been your best friend since you were children. 20 years of friendship. You can't throw that away because of a mistake he made when he was trying to look out for his little sister. He cost us 13 years, and we have the rest of our lives to make up for it. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. But not if you lose him in the process. I won't be the reason your friendship falls apart. Julian's jaw tightened. You're not the reason. His choices are the reason. Choices he made out of love. Misguided, idiotic love, but love nonetheless. She squeezed his hand. I've forgiven him, why can't you? Because every time I look at him, I think about all the time we lost. His voice roughened. I think about you spending years believing I didn't care, building walls to protect yourself from rejection that never actually happened. I think about how much pain could have been avoided if he just minded his own business. And I think about how much worse it could have been. Savannah shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder. What if you had received that letter and gently rejected me? What if I'd been too young to handle it gracefully? What if the awkwardness had driven a wedge between you and Brandon anyway, and you'd lost your best friend at 22 instead of 35? That's a lot of what-ifs. Life is nothing but what-ifs. We can't change what happened. We can only decide what happens next. She tilted her face up to meet his gaze. I don't want to be the woman who came between you and your best friend. I don't want our relationship to be built on the ruins of yours. Julian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with reluctant acceptance. You're asking me to let it go. I'm asking you to try. It's not that simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is. He laughed, despite himself, a short, surprised sound. When did you become so wise? Probably around the same time you became so stubborn. She kissed his jaw. Talk to him, really talk. Yell at him if you need to. Let him apologize again, and then decide if 20 years of brotherhood is worth more than 13 years of regret. Julian pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. She felt the tension slowly drain from his body as he held her, processing her words. I'll call him tomorrow, he said finally. Thank you. But I'm not promising to forgive him immediately. Some wounds take time to heal. I know. She kissed him softly. I just need you to be open to the possibility. For you, he murmured against her lips. I'll try anything. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, while the movie played forgotten in the background. Savannah let herself relax into his embrace, but the worry didn't fully dissipate. She had spent so many years using her feelings for Julian as a weapon against herself, convincing herself that loving him was a weakness, a vulnerability to be suppressed and denied. Now that she had finally allowed herself to embrace those feelings, new fears had emerged. What if their happiness came at too high a cost? What if Julian resented her eventually for the rift with Brandon? What if the foundation they were building was already cracked? As if sensing her spiraling thoughts, Julian's arms tightened around her. Stop thinking so loud, he murmured. Whatever's going through that beautiful head of yours, we'll figure it out. Together. She wanted to believe him. She was trying to believe him, but the shadow of doubt lingered, waiting for its chance to grow. Julian found Brandon at their usual spot, a small bar on the outskirts of town where they'd been coming since they were barely legal to drink. The same scratched wooden tables, the same faded sports memorabilia on the walls, the same bartender who remembered their orders without being asked. Brandon was already there, nursing a beer with the expression of a man awaiting execution. You came, he said as Julian slid into the opposite seat. Savannah made a compelling argument. She's good at those. Brandon attempted a smile that didn't quite land. Remember when she was 12 and convinced your dad to let her ride the harvesting equipment? 4-page presentation with pie charts. She included pie charts, color-coded. The smile grew slightly more genuine. She's always been terrifyingly persuasive when she wants something. Julian accepted the beer the bartender placed before him, wrapping his hands around the cold glass. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. I'm sorry. Brandon broke first, the words tumbling out. I know I've said it before, but I need you to understand. I never meant to hurt either of you. I was 20 years old and stupid, and I thought I was protecting her from heartbreak. By causing 13 years of it. Brandon flinched. That wasn't the plan. What was the plan, exactly? Julian's voice was calm, but an edge lurked beneath. Intercept her feelings, hide them forever, hope she forgot about them. I thought she'd move on. She was 16, Julian. 16-year-olds fall in and out of love every other week. I figured in a month she'd be crushing on some boy in her class and the whole thing would be a distant memory. He dragged a hand through his hair. I didn't know she'd hold on to it. I didn't know it would fester. You should have told me. I know. Years later, when it became clear she hadn't moved on, when you saw how she treated me, you should have said something then. I know. Brandon's voice cracked. I kept telling myself it was too late. That revealing the truth would only make things worse. That the damage was done and digging it up would just hurt everyone more. He met Julian's eyes, his own glistening. I was a coward. I chose the easy path and let both of you suffer because I was too afraid to admit my mistake. Julian stared at his oldest friend, at the guilt etched into features he knew as well as his own, at the genuine remorse that went deeper than words could express. She loves you, Brandon continued quietly. She's loved you since before she knew what love meant. And you look at her like she's the answer to every question you've ever asked. I used to wonder why all your relationships failed. Now I know. You were waiting for her, even if you didn't realize it. I was. Then don't let my stupidity ruin that. Brandon leaned forward, urgent. Hate me if you need to. Never forgive me if that's what it takes. But don't let what I did poison what you have with her. She's already pulling away, isn't she? Worrying that she's coming between us? Julian's silence was answer enough. That's my fault too. Brandon laughed bitterly. Everything's my fault. But she doesn't deserve to carry that guilt. She's spent 13 years punishing herself for feelings that were never wrong in the first place. Don't add to her burden because you're angry with me. I'm not angry. Brandon blinked. You're not? I was. Julian took a long drink of his beer, buying time to organize his thoughts. When I first found out, I wanted to put my fist through a wall. Through you, specifically. But then I looked at Savannah, really looked at her, and I realized something. What? We're here now. Despite everything, we found our way to each other. Julian set down his glass. Maybe it wouldn't have worked when she was 16. Maybe I would have rejected her, or been too noble about the age difference, or said something that hurt her worse than your silence did. Maybe the timing was wrong then, and it's right now. I'll never know. Julian, what I do know is that you're my brother in every way that matters. 20 years of friendship, 20 years of you having my back, keeping my secrets, being there when things fell apart. One terrible decision doesn't erase all of that. Brandon's composure crumbled. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, shoulders shaking. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not. Julian smiled slightly. But Savannah pointed out that she'd already forgiven you, and if she can do it, I don't really have an excuse. She's too good for both of us. Agreed. Julian reached across the table, gripping Brandon's shoulder. We're okay. It's going to take time, and you're going to have to endure approximately 10 years of me reminding you of this whenever I want to win an argument. But we're okay. Brandon laughed wetly, wiping his face. I can live with that. Good. Julian's expression grew serious. But I need something from you. Anything. Your blessing. I'm going to marry your sister, probably sooner than anyone expects. And I'd prefer to do it with my best friend standing beside me, rather than glaring from the pews. Brandon stared at him for a long moment. Then a grin broke across his face. The same grin Julian remembered from 100 childhood adventures. You're actually asking for my blessing after everything. She's your sister. Family matters to her, which means it matters to me. Brandon stood, rounding the table to pull Julian into a fierce hug. You have it. Of course you have it. Just promise me you'll take care of her. I'll spend my life doing exactly that. Then welcome to the family, brother. Brandon pulled back, his smile bright, despite the tear tracks on his cheeks. Just don't make me a third wheel at every gathering. That's my only condition. Julian laughed, the last of the tension dissolving. No promises. That night, when he returned to Savannah and told her everything, she cried. But for the first time in 13 years, they were happy tears. The Westbrook vineyard had never looked more magnificent. Thousands of twinkling lights transformed the main courtyard into a fairyland. Crystal chandeliers hung from ancient oak trees. Tables draped in ivory linen surrounded a central stage where a string quartet played soft melodies. The air carried the scent of late-blooming roses and the promise of something extraordinary. Tonight marked the launch of Westbrook's newest vintage, a special reserve blend that had been aging for 7 years. Industry experts, international distributors, journalists and longtime patrons filled the space, their conversations creating a sophisticated hum beneath the music. Savannah stood near the fountain, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, watching Julian work the crowd. He moved with effortless charm, shaking hands, sharing anecdotes, making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. But every few minutes his eyes would find hers across the courtyard, and the smile he reserved only for her would soften his features. 3 months had passed since that night beneath the oak tree. 3 months of falling deeper, learning more, building something real. Julian had been true to his word. He hadn't walked away. If anything, he had moved closer, integrating himself into every corner of her life until she couldn't imagine existence without him. "For your staring," Brandon observed, appearing at her elbow with a knowing grin. "I'm observing there's a difference. The difference being that observing sounds less lovesick?" "Exactly." She bumped his shoulder affectionately. "How are things with you and Julian?" "Better. Good, actually." Brandon's smile held genuine warmth. "We played golf last week. He only mentioned my catastrophic life choices twice, which I consider progress. He'll run out of material eventually." "I doubt it. He's remarkably creative when he wants to be." Brandon paused, something shifting in his expression. "He loves you, you know. I've known him since we were kids, and I've never seen him like this. It's almost annoying how happy you make him." Savannah felt her cheeks warm. "He makes me happy too." "Good. You both deserve it." Brandon squeezed her arm. "Now if you'll excuse me, I see a sommelier who looks like she needs someone to explain wine to her incorrectly." He wandered off, leaving Savannah laughing. Some things never changed. The evening progressed beautifully. Julian gave a speech about tradition and innovation, about honoring the past while embracing the future. The new vintage was unveiled to enthusiastic applause. Tastings commenced, and the verdict was unanimous. Westbrook had outdone itself once again. As the formal program concluded, Julian caught Savannah's eye and tilted his head toward the stage. She frowned, confused, but he was already making his way to the microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention for just another moment," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "There's one more thing I'd like to share tonight." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Savannah's heart began to race without quite knowing why. This new vintage represents 7 years of patience, 7 years of trusting the process, believing that time would transform something good into something extraordinary. Julian's gaze locked onto hers. "But I've learned recently that some things shouldn't wait. Some things have already waited too long." He extended his hand toward her. "Savannah, would you join me up here?" She couldn't feel her legs. Somehow they carried her forward anyway, through the parting crowd, up the 3 steps to the stage where Julian waited with an expression that made breathing difficult. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in that familiar, grounding way. "This woman," he said to the audience, though his eyes never left her face, "has the sharpest tongue I've ever encountered. She's late to everything. She trips over her own feet at least once a day. And she spent 13 years pretending to hate me because of a misunderstanding that wasn't either of our faults." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Savannah's eyes were already stinging. "She's also the most courageous, intelligent, beautiful person I've ever known." His voice roughened. "She makes me want to be better. She makes me laugh. She makes every room brighter just by walking into it. And she makes me absolutely crazy in the best possible way." Julian released her hand, reaching into his jacket pocket. When he lowered himself to one knee, a collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. "I've loved you longer than I knew," he said softly, for her ears alone now. "I'll love you longer than forever. So please, Savannah Mitchell, put me out of my misery." He opened the velvet box, revealing a diamond that caught the fairy lights and scattered them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face. Happy tears, the happiest tears of her life. "Only if you promise to never stop playing with my hair," she managed through the emotion clogging her throat. His smile was radiant. "Never. And never stop being insufferably overprotective. Wouldn't dream of it." and never stop looking at me like you're looking at me right now. Impossible. He slid the ring onto her trembling finger. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She pulled him to his feet and into a kiss that drew thunderous applause from the crowd. Julian's arms wrapped around her, lifting her slightly off the ground as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the cheering hadn't stopped. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I know. His grin was pure mischief. You wrote me a letter about it once. She laughed, swatting his chest. You're never going to let that go, are you? Never. He kissed her again, softer this time. It's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me, even if it took 13 years to arrive. Better late than never. My darling, he murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating tenderness. You're always late. I've learned to wait. Around them the celebration continued. Champagne flowed. Congratulations were offered. Brandon made a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and embarrassing, but for Savannah there was only Julian, and the letter that had finally found its way home. 1 year later. The vineyard was dressed in its autumn finest, leaves turning gold and crimson beneath a sky so blue it seemed painted. Savannah walked between the rows of vines, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, the other clasped firmly in Julian's. 5 months pregnant, and she still couldn't quite believe this was her life. You're thinking too loud again, Julian observed, squeezing her fingers. I'm thinking about how much things have changed. Good changes? She paused, turning to face him. The afternoon light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, new additions since the wedding, which he blamed entirely on her. She reached up to touch a strand, her heart swelling with an emotion too big for words. The best changes, she confirmed. Their wedding had been held here, among the vines that had witnessed so much of their story, intimate and elegant, with only family and close friends. Brandon had served as best man, giving a speech that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Their parents had watched with misty eyes as vows were exchanged beneath an arbor woven with white roses. That night, dancing under string lights while their loved ones celebrated around them, Savannah had finally released the last remnants of the girl who had written that letter at 16. In her place stood a woman who had found her way home. Come, Julian said, tugging her hand. I want to show you something. He led her through the vineyard to the old oak tree at the property's edge, their tree, as they had come to call it, the place where secrets had been revealed and hearts had finally aligned. But something was different today. A small wooden bench had been placed beneath the spreading branches, carved with intricate grapevine patterns, and on the bench sat a weathered envelope yellowed with age. Savannah's breath caught. Julian. Brandon found it last month. His voice was soft as he guided her to sit. He'd kept it all these years, hidden in a box in his closet. He was going to throw it away after the wedding, but something stopped him. He thought you should have it. With trembling hands, Savannah picked up the envelope. Her own handwriting stared back at her, round and careful, the penmanship of a 16-year-old girl trying desperately to appear mature. I never actually read it, Julian said, settling beside her. I thought you might want to be the one to decide whether I should. She turned the envelope over. The seal was broken. Brandon had opened it all those years ago, but the letter inside had clearly never been unfolded beyond that first reading. Do you want to know what it says? She asked. Only if you want to share it. Savannah considered the envelope. 13 years of pain and misunderstanding contained in a few sheets of paper. Part of her wanted to burn it, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the part that had finally learned to embrace vulnerability, wanted Julian to see her as she had been, young and hopeful, and brave enough to risk everything for love. She unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. Dear Julian, I know I'm too young for you, and I know you probably see me as just Brandon's annoying little sister, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something every time you walk into a room. My heart beats so fast when you're near that I'm sure everyone can hear it. You're kind and funny and handsome, and when you smile at me, even just a little, I feel like the sun has come out after 1,000 years of rain. Her voice wavered. Julian's hand found hers, steady and warm. I don't expect you to love me back. I'm not that naive. But I needed you to know that someone sees how wonderful you are. Someone thinks about you every night before falling asleep. Someone believes you're going to do amazing things with your life, and she's so grateful to know you, even if it's only as her brother's friend. Maybe someday, when I'm older, things will be different. Maybe someday you'll look at me and see something more than a girl with a silly crush. Until then, I'll love you quietly. But I wanted you to have these words, just in case. Just in case someday matters. Yours, Savannah. Silence settled over them like a blanket. Julian reached over, gently taking the letter from her hands. He read it again, silently this time, his thumb tracing over her girlish handwriting. "You were wrong about one thing," he finally said. "What's that?" "It wasn't a silly crush." He folded the letter carefully, reverently, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. It was the beginning of everything. Savannah's eyes filled with tears, happy ones, as they always seem to be these days. "You're keeping it. I told you once that if I'd received this letter, I would have saved it. That hasn't changed." He pulled her close, one hand coming to rest on her belly where their daughter grew. "This is our history, the good and the painful and everything in between. I want all of it." She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of oak and wine and home. "I love you. I love you too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Both of you." As if in response, a small flutter moved beneath his palm, the baby making her presence known. Julian's face transformed with wonder. "Was that—" "She's saying hello." Savannah laughed through her tears, probably already practicing her sharp tongue. "God help us all." They sat together beneath the oak tree as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The vineyard stretched around them, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to a love story that had taken 13 years to unfold. But some things, Savannah reflected, were worth waiting for. The letter that never arrived had finally found its destination. And so had she. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.